Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I was 28 steps below street level when the world above me changed, and then kept changing, and I was the last one to get the memo. My shift started at 6 o'clock in the interlocking tower at West 4th Street. They still call it a tower, and I'm still called a signal operator, even though the job feels more like a telegraph operator stapled to a power plant. The room sits behind a steel door with a circular viewport, a kind of door that makes you think of boats and storms. Inside, a line of humming relay racks, a wall-sized schematic of tracks, switches and signals for the junction, banks of CRTs and two newer LCDs that were bolted in a few years back after someone found replacement parts in a warehouse in New Jersey. The CRTs show camera feeds from platforms and trackways. The LCDs show train IDs and the state of the interlocking, every signal head, every block code. We're under Greenwich Village, under concrete that has settled into the shape of the city. The A, C, E and the B, D, F, M cross and weave here. Switches branch like roots. The third rail is a silver snake that never sleeps. Power is nominally 600 volts direct current, closer to 625 in practice. I've been in this room for 11 years, and even on days when the city feels like it's held together by tape and hope, the track circuits and relays behave like old friends who keep their promises. At 6:17, the first fault alarm chirped. Nothing dramatic, a transient in a signal circuit on the northbound locale. I wrote the time in the logbook, silenced the tone, and watched the block turn yellow on the schematic. It cleared a moment later. A sticky joint bond probably. Wet weather uptown. By 6:35, a second fault. A flicker on a home signal in the southbound express. I called out on the Motorola handheld, road channel, to let the morning desk at RCC know we had a nuisance. West 4th Tower, home 4x44 is flirting with failure. Code rate is intermittent. The operator on the desk, a calm, coffee-voiced woman named Alvarez, said she'd log it and ping a light maintainer if the trouble persisted. My fingers settled into the old muscle memory. Block, hold, release. At 6:48, the lights sagged. The CRTs shrank for a breath, then popped back to full frame. A relay chattered in the west rack. Once, twice. I felt it in my molars. Brown out? I said to no one, because no one else was there yet. The day shift maintainer, Mia, usually brought a sesame bagel and a bulletin board of stories about fishing at Sheepshead Bay. He was late. The logbook gained another line. The hum returned to normal. Outside the control room's door, on the platform, I could hear what I always hear at that hour. The chime of doors, the accordion wheeze of a departing train. The low friendliness of people who live underground for an hour at a time and know how to stand near one another without getting in the way. The whole place is a choreography of sound and light, and my job is to keep the music from stopping. At 7:02, it stopped. The first thing wasn't visual. It was the gap between expected sounds. No door chime, no rolling thunder of a local coming into the station, no squeal of flanges on the crossover. I glanced up and saw a handful of green aspects fade to lunar white on the board as the circuit dropped, and the LEDs do what LEDs do when you starve them. The emergency lighting flicked on a moment later, low red bars washing the rack fronts like faint brake lights. Then the phone started in. The platform desk line rang and went dead. The tunnel emergency phone line rang and threw static, a waterfall sound through copper. I lifted the desk handset, got silence, hung it up gently like it was a sleeping baby, then picked up the handheld and tried RCC. RCC, West 4th Tower, power dip, boards on emergency. You seeing this? Nothing, just the room and me and my own breath bouncing off my teeth inside my half-zipped hoodie. I've seen brownouts before. I've ridden through weather that made the river lift and set the rails groaning. There's backup for the backup. The substations carry load across sections. If one breaker opens, the adjacent feeds pick up the slack. I know the map. Know which substations are ours. Which cables cross at which manholes. What can fail and still be fine. But the emergency lights meant we were down to battery in the station. Somewhere, the utility world above us had blinked. Not unheard of, just rare. Okay, I said, to keep the thinking synchronized. We go to procedures. I shut and reopened my interlocking, one route at a time, safe as old shoes. I cleared a stalled train into the next block, logging the manual move. The train ID didn't move. The train cams showed the interior of a C car like I'd never seen it. Not the car itself. I've seen every angle of those stainless steel boxes. It was the passengers. A wide shot of a middle car. People were on their feet, shifting the way they do when the AC goes warm. A man pressed a bandana to his face. A woman held her phone over her head but wasn't filming. She was trying to catch service, arm high, the way you lift your phone by instinct to where the signal might be. The car rocked a little, as if someone had pushed from outside. The cab camera, looking forward from the operator's cab, showed black. RCC West 4th. Train 041 southbound stalled in the B Express between West 4th and Broadway Lafayette, requesting communication with TO. I switched to the car-borne cab radio channel. Southbound B at West 4th. This is Tower. Come in. The handheld stayed quiet. I pinged the open mic override, a holdover feature that lets us listen into cab audio when the TO doesn't respond. For a breath I heard wind, a shiver of static, then a sound I couldn't place. A low rub like shoes on tile. The override cut out. I toggled cameras on a southbound A held north of the station. The timestamp ticked forward, seconds real enough. A group near the doors. The nearest man wore a winter hat even though we were in late spring. He looked up into the camera lens, looking down into him. He seemed like he wanted to be seen, like that mattered. Farther back, someone moved suddenly. Shoulders hit glass. No audio feeds on the passenger cams. Our lawyers killed that during a pilot. So it was silent, just pictures. And then one of those pictures changed into something I didn't expect to see underground. Not at that hour. Not in a city where we rehearse patience like a religion. People shoving, hard. Not to get away from something, to get to something. Faces full of a heat I couldn't math. A woman fell, hands, several, went to her, not kindly. The feed stuttered once, as if it had to decide if this was a thing it wanted to carry. When the frame stabilized, she was up, bent strangely, head tilted, standing as if someone had poured her back into a wrong container. I pulled the emergency stop for the entire plant, a lever we are trained to pull only if derailment hazard is imminent, or we have people on the roadbed. The board went all red, every signal at stop, every route locked. The system responded as designed, beautiful and old. All motion quit. The service phone on the wall rang. It's a real bell, coiled and mechanical, the kind that lives in your shoulder blade. I picked up. A swirl of static again, the waterfall, and then a voice under it. A young voice pulled tight against fear. "They're in the tunnels," he said. Or maybe, "They're in the tunnels." The connection dissolved into noise. "Who is this?" I asked. "Identify." Nothing. Then the line went dead like someone cut it with a knife. At 7-Eleven, voices outside the door, running footfalls on the platform. The window in the door frames just a slice of platform edge. A maintenance crew flashed through the slice like a school of fish. Hard hats, orange vests, a bag of insulated tools. Mia was among them. His eyes found the viewport as he passed. And for a second, I saw something I'd never seen in his eyes. Not the joke he was about to make, not the patient amusement he had for the young guys, but a plain, wordless plea. He pointed to the far corridor that runs to a service gallery, then shook his head with short, tight motions. I stood, hand on the door handle. He put both hands up, palms flat, the way you'd quiet a spooked horse. Then they were gone into the corridor. I heard the door at the end bang and then bang again, like something had walked into it and kept walking. Sahi. There are procedures for fire, flood, smoke, intrusion, derailment. There are drilled protocols for evacuation. for platform crowding, for medical. There's no binder, for the city looks at itself in the mirror and doesn't recognize its own eyes. I dogged the door shut. The wheel tightened, the gasket bit. The control room is designed to be a safe spot against smoke migration and heat for long enough to hand off control. There's an independent fan, an air cylinder, a rack of emergency light batteries. It can be a ship if the hallway is a storm. I took stock. 3 liters of bottled water in the low cabinet, a carton of protein bars, a coil of old track diagrams, a field phone with crank generator that no one uses unless the universe is smaller than it was a second ago. On the board, every train had become a red oval, a train ID with nowhere to go. I tried RCC again, then the desk, then the power desk. The lines rang and rang. The city above us must have lost something big. A feeder, a substation, or too many. The backup generator for station lighting was doing what it could, but the platform cameras went into a low-resolution mode that made everyone look like they were made of fog. I forced myself to do the work that always keeps the fear busy. Count, measure, plan. I sketched the immediate plant on paper, marked the positions of trains, noted which ones still had some juice. They'd have their own onboard batteries for emergency lighting, and which ones were dark. The B between here and Broadway Lafayette was dark. The A held north had light. I wrote the car numbers where I could see them. I did what my first trainer told me to do on a bad day. Answer the room, not your brain. At 7:23, someone pounded on the door so hard the viewport glass sang. "Help!" A voice. "Open up! Open up!" "Identify," I said through the door. "Porter, station porter, West 4th. It's me, Dennis. They're on the tracks, man. They..." He swallowed the rest. Like the word itself might be a match you shouldn't strike. I looked through the viewport. Dennis is 60 if he's a day. He inched into the frame, eyes white in the red light. "Open," he said, mouth close to the glass. I spun the wheel. The door gave, like it didn't want to. He slipped inside, and I shut it immediately. The gasket sealing with a faint rubber gasp. He put his hands on his knees and breathed through his nose, like someone who had jogged a block carrying a television. "Power's out," he said, stating the obvious like it was a true thing, and true things felt rare enough to say out loud. People were already nervous up top. Then a train came in, doors open, and it looked wrong. Wrong how? People inside were standing like they forgot how to sit. Then one of them walks up to the window and just presses his face to it, staring. Not like he was asking for help, like he was looking at something that was behind me and he liked it. Then another train came in behind it and stalled. Crowd started to swell. What about the crew? Did you see a conductor? I saw a woman run. I saw a man lose his radio and keep talking into his hand. And then, Dennis stopped. You can feel when someone runs out of a story, the way you feel when a train loses power in your throat. The phones were dead. The overhead radio was static. The brownout became an outage. The emergency lights showed me my own hands more than they showed me the world. I'm the kind of person you want in a loud room, because I say less than I think, and what I do say tends to be about what we need to do next. So I did what I always do. Check the inventory, plan the next 2 moves, then the move after those. We had a track map bolted to the wall, silk-screened when I was still in high school. A short service spur, original construction remnant, ran from our plant to a ventilation chamber that hadn't been in service since before I started. The spot was used once a year as a training prop for a ventilation drill. If the vent grating up top wasn't welded shut, and the hatch on our end still opened, it was a path to daylight. I opened the metal locker where we keep the civil defense of our trade. A flashlight, a hand lamp with a steel cage, a fusee, a railroad flare, 2 red flags rolled tight, a track wrench, a signal hammer with a square head for relay cabinets and a tapered end for pins, a first aid kit, a set of S12 keys, and the blue shrink-wrap phones you can plug into a trackside jack to ring the desk. The flare gun, orange plastic, single shot, sat in its cradle below the first aid kit. Equipment for storms, not for anything else. "Dennis," I said, "we can hole up here for a while. The room's tight, but if power doesn't return and those emergency batteries die, the fans will go quiet. We'll have air, but it will get stale. We have water, but not for a long sit. If we move through the service tunnel to the vent chamber. But we only do that if we can do it without stepping where we shouldn't, literal and otherwise." He sat on the shelf by the relay racks, hands folded like he was waiting for a pastor to call his name. "I'm not going back out there," he said, softly but without negotiation. "I'll go with you. I'll go where you go, but I'm not going back to the platform." On the cameras, where they still showed anything, I saw shapes on the roadbed, people walking where they shouldn't, slowly, hands at their sides, moving with the kind of intent that ignores other plans. 2 figures in orange in a cross passage, with their backs to us, facing a third figure who stood too still. The image blurred into grey blocks, then steadied. One of the orange vests turned, and I saw Mayer again. He was speaking, mouth moving, hands up the way he'd held them to me. The other figure took a single step forward. The camera clicked off like a humble apology. "Okay," I said, and folded the map tight. "We do this simple. We pack. We check the vent hatch. If it's jammed or welded, we come back. We still have control of the interlocking on battery. If there's a way to clear trains with manual codes, we'll keep them at stations. I'm not leaving my post without making sure I'm not putting people in a dark tunnel with no path back." Dennis nodded. "I can carry," he said. I clipped the radio to my belt, even though it was a paperweight, hung the hand lamp around my neck, and stuffed 2 bottles of water, 3 protein bars, and the first aid kit into a canvas satchel we used for relay tags. I slid the S12 keys onto a loop and checked the flare gun's single cartridge. I took the signal hammer in my right hand and told myself it was a tool, not a weapon. It's made to convince metal to become what you need, not to do anything else. We cracked the door and listened. The air outside had that faint hot metal smell it gets when resistors cook. No human voices. A drip somewhere. The hum of emergency lights. I led out, Dennis behind me. The corridor to the service spur is narrow, a concrete vein with conduit running along one side and dust that never leaves on the other. Every so often, there's a blue light phone box, a call station with a keyed jack. I lifted the handset on the first one and tried to ring the desk. The static was a curtain. I thought of the city above as a net of lights, and how somewhere someone was trying to lift a corner of it back where it belonged. And I wanted to be back in my chair with all the squares on my board lit smartly and the trains obedient like schools of fish. We reached the spur gate. The chain and padlock were where they always were. My key turned. The gate slipped open. The spur is a shallow curve into a small chamber where an iron ladder runs up into a shaft. At the top, a square of darkness where the vent louvers live. The chamber always smells faintly of old brush fires and winter. Today, it smelled like 2-week-old pennies. "Ladder looks sound," I said. "We'll check the louvers before committing." I knelt and pressed my ear to the metal of the ladder. Sometimes you can hear the street if a truck passes. I heard something else. A soft skittering like old paper blown in a slow breeze, and a constant low presence, which might have been the city as a whole, or might have been the low boom a human chest makes when it holds more breath than it knows what to do with. I started up, 30 rungs. At the top, I wedged my shoulder against the louver frame and pushed with my legs. It budged, then stopped. I took the signal hammer's square head and tapped along the edge to find paint. I found weld. "Someone sealed it," I said down into the ladder well, my voice small the way a voice gets when you're in a place shaped like a flute. "We'll need time and better leverage than we have." "The platform?" Dennis said. "We can go around the long way on the catwalks. Stay off the ties." "Maybe," I said. "Or we hold and see if power returns." He didn't need me to finish the thought. If power returned, and those people up there were what my camera said they were, power would only make the trains move toward places without plans. If power didn't return, we'd sit in a room and shrink. Back in the control room, the emergency LED on the main board began to pulse. A message scrolled on one of the LCDs, letter-coded old school. System comms link restored. Then, RCC override request. The desk was reaching into my plant, asking to ride the route switches. I granted the request. The board blinked. One by one, trains on either side of platforms started to inch forward, slow as dust settling. Whoever was up at the rail control center was doing exactly what I would have done. Pull every train to a station, doors open, keep the tunnels clear. Okay, I said to the air. Okay. A text line scrolled a second later. No preface, no routing code. Like someone had jackknifed a newer system onto an older one and hoped no one would mind. All stations hold, lockdown entrances, no egress to street, controlled access only. Then another. If you are in control rooms, shelter in place. A last line. Turn off public address systems. Do not invite crowds. The keys on my desk suddenly mattered. We had the power to say things that would shape what people did. My throat felt like stone. RCC, I said into the handset, even though we hadn't fully recovered voice circuits. We are reading. Please confirm air. Please confirm incident type. The speaker gave me a voice. Alvarez. West 4th, we see you. Keep interlocking in all stop unless instructed. We're moving what we can to platforms. Hold your position. FD is en route to multiple stations. City's experiencing a public health event. Advise if you have crew. 2 in tower, I said. 2 in good health. Maintain. No platform PA. Her voice tightened very slightly. Do not open your door unless you visually confirmed employee ID and health status. I'm not supposed to say that so plainly, but I'm saying it. Understood. We waited. Waiting is work. You have to do it with your back straight so it doesn't leak into fear. I showed Dennis how to read the schematic, how the track blocks light up when the circuit is occupied, how the interlocking only ever allows one safe path at a time, how the red means a promise that no one's going to enter the route until you tell them. He listened, not because he needed the knowledge, but because knowledge makes a room brighter. Outside the door came the sound of something heavy dragged along tile, slow and patient. Then a single rap of knuckles, polite as a guest. The viewport showed a man's shoulder, a winter hat like the one I'd seen on camera, pressed close to the glass as if to rest. I didn't move. The man didn't peer in. He stood lightly without hurry, as if someone had him on pause. Minutes added to minutes. On the camera feeds, some people moved like they were in a library after closing, slow and without a need to explain themselves. Others sat and stared at nothing. A few cried, quietly like prayer. At 8:14, a blue banner lit on the LCD. Power section, restore request, section 4F. Behind that banner, a diagram of our substations. The power desk was trying to bring up a section east of us. West 4th, Alvarez said, her voice half water, half wire. We have a partial restore eastbound. We're going to run a test. Do not move any routes. Do not clear any signals. The board showed voltage creeping back into a third rail segment. A test train, an empty consist staged overnight for a track inspection, sat on the Brooklyn-bound express. It blinked from dormant to alive, tiny differences in the train icon that I alone would notice after a decade. The power desk brought it to a stop with a smoothness that was almost beautiful. We can move equipment, Alvarez said, relief touching the edges of her words. We will not move passengers until we have uniformed partners on every platform. FDNY, I said, FDNY and PD. They're mobilizing with transit. Some stations are clear. Some have altered patterns of behavior. We are to use neutral language now while records are on. Understood, I said, and wrote the word altered in the logbook with a line under it I hadn't intended. On the north camera, I caught a glimpse of something I didn't know my brain could contain. A figure in safety orange, someone I knew by posture even at distance, stepped onto the roadbed with a red flag in hand as if working a slow approach. He turned, holding the flag at his side, not to any train, but to someone just beyond the camera's frame. He smiled, the small, we're-fine smile he used for complicated nights. Then something about his hands, how still they were. People remain themselves until the small things leave. Mia, I said softly. Dennis did not ask me to repeat it. Do we stay? He said. We stay long enough to be part of the fix, I said. Then we find the surface. We used the weight to become competent at something that might matter. We packed a second satchel with a coil of nylon rope, a roll of red tags for lockout, a box cutter, a spare radio battery that had nowhere to spend its life, and 2 extra fusees. I taught Dennis how to check the air in the emergency cylinder, how to work the manual valve on the interlocking slugs if power died, and we needed to throw a route by hand. He told me about the way the city sounded outside that morning, sirens massing then thinning, the way pigeons folded themselves into cornices when they should have been pecking for breakfast. At 9:03, a low bass rumble grew under our feet that wasn't trains. Generators. Somewhere, someone had brought a substation back to partial. The emergency lights brightened a shade. The CRTs held their frames without wavering. The board printed another instruction from RCC. Prepare for guided evac of select trains. FD at West 4th in 12 minutes. That number did not prove to be entirely correct. 12 minutes is an optimistic unit of time on a day when reality is working overtime, but the anchor of it stuck to our thinking. We had a partner on the way. When FDNY did arrive, they arrived as they always do, direct, layered, wearing the history of 1,000 days like this that were actually nothing like this at all. The viewport filled with yellow reflective tape and a clean, honest face under a helmet. He held his ID to the glass, then his gloved fingers. 1, then 2, then a slow, deliberate 3, the code we agreed on years ago in drills for open, shut and lock again. I spun the wheel. They came in, 2 firefighters and a transit copper, all controlled breath and steady questions. The officer, white helmet, commanding calm, was named Tran. He'd served in Marine Ops, knew our air plenums better than some of my colleagues. We're holding platforms. We're not inviting people to the surface unless they're screened, he said, scanning the schematic the way someone reads a weather map. A health event is propagating via close contact. We need to keep groups small and keep a sanitary perimeter. He was careful with words. I registered the care and let it sit. Copy, I said. We can hold trains at platforms with doors open to increase air exchange. We can PA to keep calm, but RCC advised no PA to avoid crowd expansion. Tran nodded. We'll do directed announcements. We have a medic up top. We're going to do a walkthrough to the stalled equipment east. If we can bring them back empty, we will. You stay in the tower. Dennis looked like he wanted to be told to stay in the tower. He got his wish. The firefighters gave us 2 spare and 95 masks from their kit, told us to keep our door shut, to ignore knocks unless they came in the pattern we just used. They left with that calm people have when their next action is obvious. What I had then was a job I understood. I held the plant. I handed routes to RCC when they called for them. We conveyed a stalled D consist into the station, doors kept shut by transit while they took a look inside. The operator in the cab had a cut above his eyebrow and the look of someone who wanted to be told a series of instructions. Transit took him under an arm and walked him the way you walk a friend who might faint, but probably won't. We saw people in the cars who didn't look quite right, still too attentive to nothing, but they stayed where they were. I logged everything. I said what was true into my radio with a voice that sounded like mine. By early afternoon, the shape of the day had formed. Some stations were quiet, some were chaotic, many were simply in between. We kept trains as near platforms as we could. People went home if home was near. People stayed underground if above looked like it had too many unknowns. The word quarantine lived next to us without being spoken. The city took a deep breath and held it. We had one more big decision to make, and it came not from RCC, not from FD, not from the platform, but from our room and its sealed air. Our emergency fans cycled and cycled again. The battery LEDs that tell you how long you can pretend the world is normal. A la carte ticked down. We've become a lifeboat, Dennis said, not unkindly. The kind that stays next to the ship until it has to row. Yeah, I said. We'd be fine for a day. But if this goes on, the vent, he said, the word part suggestion and part challenge. Yeah, the vent. The hatch up to the vent louvers was welded. But welded things can become unwelded things with time and force we did not possess yesterday, but might possess today. We had a signal hammer and a desire to be somewhere else. We had rope. We had patient attention. I checked the board a last time, turned interlocking control back over to RCC with a note. Tower will maintain shelter in place possible egress via service spur if air quality or security warrant. Alvarez acknowledged in short code language that said both, do what you must and write it down. We went to the spur. The ladder felt like an old friend's arm. Steady if you don't ask it to be anything, it isn't. I carried the hammer clipped by a lanyard and a small pry bar we'd found in the maintainer's locker. At the top, I placed the square end of the hammer against the weld bead along the bottom of the louver frame. I tapped, then tapped harder, then leaned into it and made the metal say no in a clear voice. The trick with old welds is that they never fail gracefully. They crack all at once, or they waste your day. 15 minutes, 20, my shoulder sang. Dennis anchored me with the rope. Not because I was going to fall, but because doing so made the world more ordered. On the 40th minute, the bead along the bottom left corner gave a sound like breaking chalk. I stopped, breath held, the room listening. I worked the pry bar under the edge and levered upward. The louver rose a fraction. I felt outside air on my hand, faint and cool and tasting of a city that was still itself. Another crack, another fraction. We alternated. When my arm shook, Dennis tapped. When he flagged, I wedged. The city outside did what it does. Let trucks roll and people choose. While below, 2 people asked an old weld to retire. At an hour and a half, the louver moved enough to wedge my fingers under and lift. It stuck, then slid up with a groan and clanked into its stops. Fresh air bent into the shaft and down into our faces like a small mercy. We stood there and breathed. It's funny how often the most dramatic thing you can do is just let your body perform its simplest trick. We turned our lights up and looked through the louvers. We could see the underside of a sidewalk grate, shoes past, a pair of white sneakers, a boot with a taped toe, a set of smaller feet walking in a straight, purposeful line like a marching band. Voices drifted. A gentle command voice saying, one at a time. Another voice asking, can I call my sister? A third humming without words. No shouting. A good street to come up to. We rigged the rope to the ladder and tested it. We packed the satchel with the last water bottle and the first aid kit, fusees, and our keys. We left a note on the control desk for whoever would come after. Interlocking on remote. Tower secure. Exited via vent shaft. I left my name because names are proof we were here. Back at the hatch, I went up first. At the grate, I set the signal hammer down and pushed. The grate lifted with the kind of complaint any old cast iron will give you when asked to move. I eased it to the side, moved it a foot, then a second. Sunlight reached down into that shaft and laid a hand on the top of my head, and for a beat I felt like a plant. Careful, a voice said, not harsh, not warning, simply companionable. I looked up. A transit officer stood over the opening, glove out, offering a hand. You from the tower? Yeah, I said, as if that meant something beyond my small room and its board. We're 2. He nodded. We've got a controlled area up here. You'll come right into it. You'll go to medical, answer questions, then we find you a seat. The city is reorganizing itself. Dennis came up behind me and set his hand in mine in a way that was not about balance, but about recognition. We pushed the grate aside and eased onto the sidewalk. The grate settled with a solid sound, and the city's light and air took us like old friends. West 4th Street looked both familiar and edited. A collection of sawhorses and tape made a gentle rectangle the size of a living room around the grate. The tape read, "Police line, do not cross." The words now less command and more suggestion. To the north, a cordon of FDNY ambulances formed a wall of red and white rectangles. A small queue aimed itself at them. Orderly, human, eyes bright, The storefronts across the way were closed, but someone had written the word open in careful block letters on the glass of a coffee shop and stood outside with a tray of cups, as if to prove it. The transit officer walked us to a folding table where a woman in a high-visibility vest checked us in with a pen and a smile that reached her eyes. "Names," she said, and we gave them. "You two have been breathing air in a sealed room. Any headache, nausea?" "Only the usual," I said. She laughed, not because it was hilarious, but because humor is a way to braid people together. We were handed water and a small packet of wipes. We were told to sit on a bench and breathe while someone with a gentle voice asked us where we had been and what we had seen. We answered in the plainest words we could find. I did not say the word that had tried to stand up in my throat earlier, the one that would make any platform announcement different forever. I said what was true. People in cars behaving unlike themselves, crew who did their best, power interruption and partial restore, signals behaving as designed, interlocking transferred to remote control, tower sealed, vent hatch used for egress. The woman wrote it all down, not because she didn't trust me to remember, but because writing puts a frame around anything worth remembering. After, Tran came over, helmet under one arm. He looked like he'd walked through the kind of day that changes how you stand for the rest of your life. "You did good work," he said. "Keeping trains at platforms made our job 20 times easier. We've got medics on every stairwell now. We're letting the city be small for a while. Then we'll let it be big again." "Streets?" I asked. "Patchwork. Some blocks are fine, some aren't. We've learned to move as if the city is made of rooms, and we open doors one at a time. The health folks are saying, stay calm, minimize contact, keep groups tight. We're using language that doesn't light matches." "RCC?" I said. "Still up. Your Alvarez is worth her weight in the heavy coins." I looked west, where the sun sits down late in the day, at the slice of sky a New Yorker will call big, because we measure our sunsets between buildings. "Can I go back down?" I said, surprising myself. "Not now, but later, when this—" I waved my hand at the air, which held more than it used to, "becomes procedure, not panic." "You can and you will," Tran said. "The room remembers you, and the city needs people who can make rails behave. But first you're going to drink that water, and you're going to sit close to your friend, and you're going to count buses for me for 10 minutes, because you have been living in a very small square, and now I'm going to give you a long rectangle." He was right. The buses came one by one, their head signs indicating routes I'd never memorized, because I was a railman and a creature of tunnels. People climbed aboard in calm clusters, sat in seats and looked at their hands, then at one another, then at the window and the light. The bus doors closed with the quiet, breathy sound that always made me think of someone agreeing with you. When the bus carrying us rolled into the street, we passed grates and stairheads and stations with cones at their lips, being measured and introduced to the day with care. In a window, I caught my reflection. A man with dust on his cheek and clean water in his hand and a room behind his eyes that still hummed. 2 days later, after the city had learned to speak a new language about what was happening without using words that would make the wrong rooms fill, I went back underground with a transit crew to relieve a colleague who had slept in a chair. The room smelled like the room. The board showed routes and trains moving with their new caution, each stop a deliberate choice. I put my hands on the console and said hello. I logged on, and we did the thing anyone who loves this city learns to do. We moved people slowly and with respect. The days that followed were the longest I've lived and also the shortest. We learned who should move and who should stay. We learned that light matters and so does quiet. We learned that the system can be a sanctuary if you don't ask it to be perfect. We learned how to keep the tunnels from becoming places where people get lost. When I was a kid, my uncle worked a bridge tender's shack upstate. He told me once that his job was not to lift the bridge, really. It was to keep boats and cars from having an argument. "I'm the person who tells them they're both right," he said, and then he smiled, like he knew it was a lie, and a truth at the same time. Down here, below 4th Street, with the city's pulse coming through the bolts in the floor. My job had become to tell the trains and the people the same thing. You are both right. You both get to be here. You both get to move, but not all at once. They'll write books about what happened, about the day the world above decided to stop going around corners politely and started cutting them sharp. They'll count statistics and draw maps with dots. I will remember a welded vent louver and a man in a winter hat who stood politely at a door and did not knock twice. I will remember Dennis sitting on the relay rack shelf like it was a pew, hands folded, ready to carry what needed carrying. I will remember Alvarez's voice, a river you could set a bridge in. I will remember Tran saying the city is made of rooms and will open them one at a time. If you ask me what I do, tomorrow or next month or next year, I'll say I keep the light moving under the city in a way that makes sense. I'll say I count seconds between green and red. I'll say I make routes. If you ask what I did on a morning when the power faltered and the cameras showed us something we weren't prepared to see, I'll say I kept my promises to the city of 1,000 doors. I'll say we stayed in our room until it was time to leave, and then we left by the careful path, and then we came back by the same. And if, in a quieter hour, you ask me what it felt like when fresh air found us halfway up that ladder and put its hand on our faces, I'll tell you it felt like the city was saying, in the accent that only old cities have, "You're not alone down there." I'll tell you we answered back with the only thing that ever matters in a crisis. We hear you. Then I'll go back to my board and keep the signals honest, because that's how we survive in a maze, by turning confusion into a series of lights you can trust. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.